This year, the British Academy Film Awards ceremony was held Sunday, February 22nd, 2026 in London, England at the Royal Festival Hall. And during that ceremony, campaigner John Davidson, who has Tourette syndrome and whose life actually inspired the film I Swear, he shouted something I will refer to from now on as Ninja Turtles. My literal very first acquaintance with this story was seeing a string of posts where people were laughing. People were saying stuff like, you have to admit it's funny. People wrote, it's Tourette's, relax, it's pretty funny. And I gotta tell you, as a black person, I didn't find anything funny. No, strike that. As a black physician, I did not find anything funny because that's gonna be important in this video. Strike that. As a black physician who has decades experience working directly with special needs kids, I did not find anything funny. Okay, let's proceed. I'll finish telling you what happened. So John Davidson, he screamed Ninja Turtle like real loud. You can hear it. He did it not once, but 3 times, according to multiple accounts. And one of those being Hannah Beachler, who said it was directed at her as she was walking in. The online response in many spaces was immediate amusement. But in my algorithm as a black woman, it's going to be a little different. It's going to be a little different from what you would see if you're a white user. The response was something else. Like, black people, they were hurt. They were suspicious. Some of them were just exhausted at seeing yet another story along these lines. And I'll tell you what kind of story I'm talking about in a minute. I'm a physician, and I've been educated and worked directly with children diagnosed with Tourette syndrome. I've worked with children on the autism spectrum with comorbid Tourette syndrome. I've spent decades, literally decades, helping young people with special needs transition into adulthood with dignity, with independence, and with as few restrictions and supervisions as possible. So I'm not confused about the diagnosis of Tourette syndrome. I'm concerned about the response and the lack of nuance in the response. Actually, I'm going to say the lack of nuance in the response on both sides. Okay, because among non-black, I saw lightheartedness, excuses, medicalization, coping. And on the black side, I saw out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And I'm going to admit to you that I agree with that latter statement more than I did with the response from the former. Okay, but that's not exactly right either. And I know that as a doctor, I know that as somebody intimately involved in the lives of these kids, and these kids are transitioning into adulthood. I know Tourette syndrome is a real diagnosis. And though the corpulalia part is way overrepresented in pop media, it does actually occur. Vocal tics, in fact, has to be a part of the presentation for a kid to be diagnosed with Tourette syndrome. But out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks resonated with me more as it applied to this man, John Davidson. And I am going to defend that, I promise, if you just hang in there with me. But I am talking about for this one individual, not for everybody with Tourette syndrome. And that's why this conversation needs to happen in a longer format than a 40-character blurb online. Okay, so though I was more on the side of people that were saying that about John Davidson in particular, I admit it's kind of irresponsible just to put a statement like there. And I was guilty of saying it. I was, because I wanted people to stop laughing, basically. And there was some truth to that statement, the one that boils it down to out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. However, that statement leaves a lot to be desired, and I can admit that. However, the overwhelming response of the majority of the dominant people, of the non-black people, was it was irresponsible too. Okay, so let me try to bring some nuance to this conversation so that we can talk about this responsibly. So let's talk about Tourette syndrome, what it is, what it isn't. Tourette syndrome is a neurodevelopmental disorder. It's characterized by multiple motor tics, and you do have to have at least one vocal tic. It has to be present for more than a year and is diagnosed before the age of 18. Tics are sudden, they're rapid, reoccurrent. Many patients describe a urge, a buildup, an impulse. It's temporarily relieved by performing the tic, whether it's motor or vocal. Suppression is often possible, but it's uncomfortable and is sometimes limited, especially with the kids. Sometimes they haven't learned how to be able to suppress it. So, none of this means that what happened could not have been a genuine, organic, involuntary tick. It means that it is not ableism to be suspicious and to ask questions and to consider context. Nuance in this case matters. So, I want to tell you from my experience what we teach children with Tourette's. So, in my work, we don't just excuse children indefinitely for anything because they have a special needs. We equip them. We teach them self awareness. We teach them to identify the buildup of urges and impulses. We teach them coping strategies. We teach them how to remove themselves from situations when necessary, especially in my specific line of work where I deal with kids transitioning into adulthood, where they will have to advocate and take care of themselves if they want to live independent, healthy lives. So, why do we not just excuse behavior even if they have a diagnosis, even if they have a true special need? Because the goal is autonomy. We want them to like attend college. We want them to be able to go to theaters. We want them to go to Walmart. We want them to be able to go to classrooms and award shows. We want them not to have permanent supervision wherever they go. We want them to be able to live freely. If we can get a kid with a bunch of diagnoses to be able to live freely and independently and happily, we win. So this freedom requires preparation. And if a child in my care were to involuntarily shout a deeply offensive racial slur in a public setting, if they were in a grocery store and they said Ninja Turtle when they saw a black person, our next step would be like, well, that happened. So what are we going to do about it? We would remove ourselves from the environment. We would identify what triggered it, and we would reassess how we're going to approach it next time. This would not be punishment. This would be management. It would be teaching them ultimately to manage themselves independently. That is not ableism. That is adaptive functioning. So when an adult like John Davidson with significant resources, media training, and presumably long-standing awareness of his diagnosis, because remember I said that this diagnosis happens before the age of 18 by definition. So he's been long aware of his condition and he has resources to be able to manage his condition. So when he repeats a deeply offensive racial slur multiple times in a formal televised setting and does not remove himself, it's not anti-science. It's not uncompassionate to ask questions. It's reasonable. So that leads me to my next point. Repetition and context does matter. If something happens once, that's one conversation. But if it happens 3 times, that's another. A totally different conversation. And again, we're just asking questions. And it's reasonable to ask questions about John Davidson's behavior and the context at this point. So if it's reportedly directed his Tourette's outburst towards a specific group of people, there's another layer to that. And I'll explain it in a moment when I explain Tourette's more. But if the institution, BAFTA, broadcast the event last year and edited out somebody screaming, "Free Palestine," why couldn't they edit this out? Why did they let it stay in there? We're not going to ignore context clues because the person has a disability. That's what we're not going to do. That I don't do that with my kids. I don't do that. I didn't do that when I worked with very young kids, and I'm definitely not going to do it with my kids transitioning into adulthood where they want to live in polite society. Now, on that, I'm not saying that a person can have a disease that doesn't allow them to live in polite society, so we should, get rid of them. God forbid, I don't have that type of thinking. That's along the lines of eugenics, and we're not about that. Okay. But if they want to live in polite society without supervision, there are some requirements and minimum standards. There is so much more I could say about all of this. There's so much more education there is to be gathered from this situation. But in the name of brevity for the moment, I'm going to end with some stories. Okay, because I want to show you that we all, to some degree, have our own special needs. We're our own individual people with individual habits and individual weaknesses, things that could determine our station in life. We have things that are inherent that we're born with and we can't control, but how we deal with the hand we are dealt has a lot of influence on the kind of life we're going to live. And society also has a lot of influence on the kind of life we're going to live. If we have a society that tolerates hate more so for one group of people than they will for another group of people, well, that's the kind of society we'll be stuck with. Okay, one where there's always a marginalized group, and then there's the other groups that fight like hell not to be the most marginalized group or to stay on top. Do you want a rigged system as long as you're at the top of that rig, that pyramid? That's another conversation for another day. Let me get back on topic. Now, we all know that one of the most marginalized groups of people are Black people, and this is not up for debate. I'm not go argue with your mama. I'm not arguing with you. Okay? So, disability is real, but so is anti-Blackness in a ubiquitous way. So, it is possible to hold two truths at once. Tourette syndrome, real. The prevalence of anti-Blackness, real. The way even decent people, quote unquote, decent people, will tolerate anti-Blackness while they will not tolerate other forms of discrimination is real. Now, Tourette syndrome sometimes comes with coprolalia. That's real too. Involuntary vocalizations, they're all real. But anti-Black racism is also real, and institutional tolerance of anti-Black harm is real. Dismissal of Black discomfort is real. Disability deserves compassion, but it does not require a suspension of all critical thought. It's okay that some people are asking whether adequate precautions were taken. It wasn't an attack on disabled people, it was an analysis of this situation. It's okay that people are questioning John Davidson's responsibility in the matter and his planning for a high-risk environment. Let me tell you something about Tourette's. The vocal tic, the particular word that comes up, has to be in the person's lexicon or environment. They can't have a verbal tic for a word they've never heard. Okay, so there is that element. There is also, what should I say, warning signs that you are having this urge. And again, if the reports are true, multiple accounts are true that this man said it 3 times, well, he didn't have to wait till showtime to realize he wasn't going to be able to handle this situation, the sight of Black people. He wasn't going to be able to handle it without being unreasonably offensive. Okay, so one time, even if it took him having to blurt it out one time for him to really understand he couldn't handle the situation, that one time should have been the deal maker. Like, I'm getting my tail up and leaving. I obviously can't control myself, even though I'm an adult and I've had this condition and I'm well managed and I got all the resources. I haven't gotten to a point where I can manage myself to be in this situation at an award show. Reasonable. Okay, understood. Maybe he's never been to an award show before and he wasn't prepared for that. Okay, but let's not act like Ninja Turtles comes from nowhere. So, what do we tell children with Tourette syndrome? We do not tell children with Tourette syndrome that society must simply endure whatever happens without them making any preparations. We prepare them. We create systems. We strategize. We even have them take accountability and apologize, because just because it wasn't intentional doesn't mean it wasn't hurtful. That's accountability. That's preparation. That's love for those kids, which I have deeply for each kid I've ever worked with. So why should adulthood erase expectations? It shouldn't. So that leads me into my stories, my scenarios, okay? And I'm going to prove that you have had special needs before and you've done the things I tell you we require of our children transitioning into adulthood. If you've had any type of success in life, you've had to accommodate yourself and take into account what society will endure and adjust yourself to society and to different environments and to microenvironments. We've all done it. Let me start off with the most extreme example. Okay, let's talk Jeffrey Dahmer. I've looked at a lot of documentaries on that particular criminal, and let me tell you, I believe he is an example of somebody who had urges and impulses that were difficult to control. But at the end of the day, we all hold him accountable for making some bad decisions about what to do, what was inherently broken about him. And the reason it was broken is because society is not going to tolerate you being a bowl of cereal devourer, if you know what I mean. We don't tolerate that. You could prove it with science that, he has these impulses and they're stronger than anybody could understand and whatever. If he doesn't learn how to manage them himself, what do? We put them in extreme supervision called our penitentiary system. Whether that should be punitive or not, again, is a conversation for another day, but we definitely agree that person needs supervision. It's not just tolerated. And we certainly don't laugh when those impulses are fully realized and a person is hurt over them and families are hurt. That's the extreme example. I want you to understand that during the time, I don't even know if I can say, this on YouTube yet, but during a range of 2020 to about 2023, if you coughed, that was inappropriate in society. If you were standing in the pharmacy line at Walgreens and you, let's say, had a tickle in your throat, or this happens to all of us at some point, we have a little flap of tissue in the back of our throat called the epiglottis, and it covers our trachea and keeps food and particles and moisture from going down our trachea into our lungs. But all of us have had a moment where that little epiglottis fails and something gets in that trachea, and whether you want to cough or not, you got to cough. And what did you do? You did your best to make it stop, and if it wouldn't stop, you covered your mouth with all your strength, with anything you had, and you might even have to remove yourself from the situation. You didn't just sit there coughing on the back of somebody's neck and say, "Oh no, no, I don't have a virus. I don't have the thing. I just have a tickle in my throat." It was socially unacceptable, and you knew it. And you knew it, and you did something about it, okay? And you, at the end, you could tell people that were considerate and people that were not. And with that, I reach the finale, my own personal story, which, like you, I have dozens of them I could choose from. But I vividly remember when I first was diagnosed with TMJ and my jaw would be out of alignment. And I was just getting used to having that problem. And it happened to be at a time when I would be around people and around patients. I was in medical school when it got really bad, my TMJ, my misaligned jaw. And the reason this was a problem was because it would cause me to drool. It would cause me to sometimes spit on people, on things when I didn't mean to. And you better believe when I learned that that could happen, I started doing things to avoid the problem. I knew that I couldn't just walk in a patient's room spitting on everybody or drooling and saying, "Oh, I have special needs. I have TMJ, excuse that." Spitting on people is inexcusable. And I had to do something about that. And I couldn't expect society to bend to that. If worse came to worse and there was nothing I could do to stop it, I would have had to drop out of medical school. I would have had to go somewhere where drooling was okay. Okay. That there's reasonable accommodations for a reason. That word reasonable is there for a reason. And the ultimate Karen, and I'm sorry if your name is Karen, that's why I don't usually use that term, but I need you to understand what I'm trying to say. The ultimate dysfunctional, entitled person is the person that thinks that society, all of society, has to bend to their special needs. And if that they make a case good enough about their special needs, that everybody should bend and accommodate it. Like they should have different rules than everybody else. Well, I was late because I have, 35 children and a flat tire and a beater of a car. And okay, we all got problems and we all have to manage them. And if we don't manage our problems, we have to be managed. And the less we can manage our own problems, the more we'll have to be managed. And the more you're supervising, the less you can do, and the less you get to go out, and the less you get to have fun. I'm putting it on the level of what I tell my kids transitioning, okay? Like, what kind of life do you want? What is your goal? Okay, reach for it, try for it, but understand society is not going to accommodate you. You have got to accommodate and adjust yourself to society, to your environments, to your microenvironments. That doesn't mean that reasonable accommodations aren't necessary to be inclusive, to allow disabled people to be able to live as normal life as possible. Asking for a ramp to be installed so that people who have mobility challenges can get into a building, reasonable. Asking people to excuse the fact that you are unsteady on your knees and you might fall on them with your 100, 200-pound body at any moment, unreasonable. You get my point. And when you start making a 200-pound problem a 10-pound problem because of the group of people that it happens to harm or be offensive to, that's when we're talking about discrimination. So don't get mad at us for asking questions when we know that research proves, and I'm talking about Black people when I say us, research proves that society as a whole asks those questions less when it is anti-Black racism. It's just tolerated a little bit more. And this is not speculation. This is not just my personal experience. This is backed up by research. And now this video comes full circle back to where it started. We all know this. You don't have to agree with me about the anti-Black stuff, because if you're not Black, you are incentivized to deny what I'm saying about the Black stuff and Ninja Turtles and all that. All that is acceptable to you. However, you know this, and you can see this when you talk about marginalized groups in general, okay? If you want to get off the anti-Black thing, let's get to this. If you think about your favorite marginalized group, the one that you imagine when I say marginalized group and have some sympathy for, you understand that when hate or something unacceptable comes their way, people tend to minimize. They tend to make jokes to lighten the mood and say, don't be so tight. Okay, let us make some jokes about it. They intellectualize it. They medicalize it. Every other excuse except reckoning with it and saying, nope, it's unacceptable. We as a society got to do something about this. Okay, but when it's somebody powerful or important, there's immediate outrage. There's like moral clarity. Oh, that's not funny. We shouldn't joke about such things. There's calls for accountability. When a certain person last year was ended up out of here, jokes were not acceptable to a lot of people. Let's just leave it there. Okay. So returning to my personal example, let's just say that my TMJ, I didn't learn how to manage it or control it. Everybody had to deal with it. I worked in the VA system for a while, which means that I could have came in contact, in theory, with a member of Congress or even the president himself. I may have been at that particular hospital, which I'm not gonna say. I don't want to put it in this video to alert it or something. But let's just say we all know that hospital that the president goes to, and let's say I was a doctor, a young medical student, or even when I was a resident, I was at that hospital and I hadn't dealt with my spitting problem, and for whatever reason, I was the doctor greeting the president for his physical that day. And think about your favorite president. Don't make this partisan. Just think about your favorite president and me, a medical student, a medical resident, going up to him and saying, "Hi, sir," and a big DNA glob of spit going right in his face because I hadn't learned how to manage my special needs. Let's just say that happened. You think I'm going to be his doctor? No, society would not accept that. Nobody would say, well, she has special needs. Let her be your doctor. No, they're going to get another doctor. And I'm going to lose my position. Okay? Because some things are just unacceptable. I had TMJ, and that means my jaw, my mouth could be different at different times of the day, even it could change. And so it was hard to learn how to coordinate with that. And I had to wear masks, and I stopped eating in public because of this. To this day, I still at functions and parties usually don't eat, even though the TMJ has gotten more stable. I adapted myself. I didn't wait for the world to adapt to me. I'll see y'all next time.